Everybody ready for a dose of science? Great, because that's what you're going to get. Every 2 weeks, we'll be with you. Joining me, Jonathan Jerry, Ada McQueen, Emily Shore, my colleagues. And as you see, we have retitled our series, our web series. We used to call it COVID-19 Discussions with OSS plus more. Well, now we're really going to deliver the more, because it's not that we're out of COVID-19. Unfortunately, we're not going to be out of this for a long time. But I think we need to discuss some other aspects of science as well. It's not that we're going to stay away from COVID. No, we cannot do that because there's always something coming up. But we will delve into other interesting things. Today, we'll take a look at snake oil, what that is all about. We'll also take a look at the deadly aspects of nitrogen. Boy, you wouldn't think nitrogen is deadly. We breathe it all the time. 80% of our air is nitrogen. Anyway, let's get started here. And we will start with COVID because things are happening. Last week, press release by the Montreal Heart Institute, a study showing a link between colchicine and reduced severity of COVID-19. Let's start with that. Jonathan.
Yeah, it was called a game changer in a lot of the press coverage that I saw on this. We were told that it reduces hospitalizations by 25%, mechanical ventilation need by 50%, deaths by 44%. Really, really surprising. So colchicine is extracted from a plant called the autumn crocus. It's been known for a while. It's been used for various things. Currently, it can be used to reduce flare-ups if you have gout. It's used to treat a very peculiar genetic condition where people get episodes of fever regularly. It's called familial Mediterranean fever. And I set up a genetic test for this many years ago when I was working in molecular diagnostics. And I was really shocked to find out that there is this genetic condition where you can inherit a mutation in a gene that makes you have flashes of fever on a regular basis. But there it is. It's also used in plant breeding to create extra chromosomes of genetic material. And with COVID, colchicine was thought that it could theoretically limit the inflammation that we often see with the disease and thus save lives. And so it was tested. There was a big trial. They recruited almost 4,500 people. They put them for 30 days on colchicine. And then we got this press release, right? Again, game changer, game changer. But the numbers that I mentioned earlier, you may have noticed my use of the word by. It was reduced by 40%, by 50%. And this by is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And it's an indication that we're talking about relative reductions, right? It was here, now it's down there. And this difference is, let's say, 50% of that first value. And these numbers can be very, very deceiving. So,
and it makes for a sexy press release.
Yes, it always makes for a very sexy press release. And now, about a week and a half ago, as we're recording this, the manuscript for the study finally came out as a preprint. So it has not been published in a scientific journal yet. It has not been officially peer-reviewed by scientists, but the manuscript, the draft, if you will, is now available for everyone to look at. And what we're seeing is not what we were promised. In absolute numbers, if you look, so some people got colchicine, some people got a placebo. 5.7% in the placebo group ended up being hospitalized. Not a lot, but still 5.7% versus 4.5% in the colchicine group. So it's not nothing, but it's not a medical revolution either. The reduction in deaths, it went from 0.4% of people in the placebo group to 0.2%. And those numbers are not these pinpoint numbers. They have margins of error around them, fairly wide margins of error as well. So in light of all this, the Quebec Healthcare Agency reviewed these findings, and they said that they cannot recommend the use of colchicine for the treatment of COVID. They called for doctors to be cautious when prescribing it. They said that more studies are needed. And so, I mean, Joe, as you wrote about this last week, I mean, this is yet another example of science by press release, right? So we are announcing the highlights. We're putting our best foot forward. But as we often find out during COVID, a lot of these results are exaggerated or they're very carefully curated. And when you look at the actual numbers, unfortunately, it's a lot less impressive than we were led to believe.
Yeah, well, to separate the wheat from the chaff here and to put it very succinctly, if we tease out the real important information here, what it says is that if we have 100 people and you who have tested positive PCR tests for it or who are symptomatic, you give them all colchicine, you're going to save one serious reaction. That's it, 1 out of 100. Now, that's, as you said, it's not nothing, especially if you happen to be the one.
Yep.
Right. But it's not yet time to jump on our high horse. But people are doing that. And my daughter, who's the family physician, already has had a number of patients ask to prescribe colchicine.
I can imagine. Yeah.
These are people who've not even been tested, no symptoms, nothing, prophylactically.
Right.
Ada, wrong thing, right?
Oh, it's so ridiculous. And I mean, it is going to cause drug shortages for the people who need to take this medication for legitimate reasons, diagnosed reasons. And I mean, we live in Canada. We're lucky to have, drug prices subsidized to a certain extent, but I'm sure this is still an expensive medication, and it's only going to drive prices higher if you lower the available supply.
One interesting thing is in Canada, in fact, it's very cheap. It's about 6 cents a pill.
Oh, okay,
In the US, it's 100 times more. Now, there's a backstory there, very interesting backstory that we don't need to get into. But the Americans, of course, are very upset by the fact that in Canada it costs 1/100th. But there are many other examples.
And our border is closed now, so they can't come up here to get it.
If Trump was in office, he would be touting about colchicine.
Right. I think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, some other good news that has come out. We saw the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Again, this is a double dose vaccine, although it's a different platform. This is not messenger RNA, it's a viral vector vaccine. And here too, I think the press got a lot of this wrong, because they jumped on this 66% or whatever efficacy and compared that to the over 90% with Moderna and with Pfizer. What didn't get much publicity is that in the Johnson & Johnson trial, in terms of hospitalization and serious disease, it was 85% effective, which of course is extremely important, extremely meaningful. I mean, we can all deal with, symptoms like the flu, like Ada dealt with, right? Like when you had the COVID, there's no hospitalization involved. I mean, it was annoying for a while, but you survived it, right? So that's not the real worry. The real worry is overloading the hospitals and obviously dying. And if you get 85% protection from that, that's pretty good. So I think that was a bit misleading.
What's happening with the AstraZeneca vaccine?
It's not approved here yet. It's not approved in the US. It's approved in the UK and many other countries. It looks very good.
Is that the one that Trudeau is looking at producing here in Canada?
No. There are several Canadian companies that are going to produce vaccines on very similar platforms. The Russian vaccine, and actually we just had today, we had the release of the data from the Russian vaccine, which looks very good. This is very much like the AstraZeneca vaccine. It's an adenovirus vaccine, and they have a 92% efficacy. So it looks very good. It's not quite as large a study. They had about 15,000 in the vaccination group and 4,000 in the placebo group. I don't know why that disparity there. But a lot more people in the placebo group got COVID than in the vaccine group. So it looks kind of good. A lot of people, of course, are suspicious because it's a Russian vaccine.
Well, I will also add a little asterisk, which is that Hilda Bastian, who's been doing a fantastic job of keeping track of these vaccine releases, looked over the data today and said, I can't really find a detailed protocol of what they did in their trial, and I find this a little bit peculiar. So, we would still like to have a bit more transparency, I think, when it comes to
well, apparently it's in the Lancet, so we'll see.
Is it a one dose or two?
It's a 2-dose vaccine, same thing, it's 21 days apart.
Okay.
So we'll see. And then the Chinese, of course, are also working. They have a number of vaccines. And then there's the Novavax, which is an American company, and that also looks quite good. So, within a relatively short time, we will have a number of potential vaccines. And, I mean, people already are saying, well, what if I can't get the best? What if I can't get Pfizer or Moderna? Am I going to stoop to getting Johnson & Johnson? Yeah. No, there's no stooping here. Whatever you can get, you get. The more people will get vaccinated, the faster, the better it is. Don't worry about the difference between 85% and 92%.
Yeah. The fact that anyone even knows, what type of vaccine did you get and all these things. I mean, we get vaccines all the time, right? As when we go to the doctor, we get our boosters, kids get vaccines, but we've become these, like, I don't want to say scientists, but these like little army people spouting science terms. And all of a sudden, like, oh, you got the mRNA, you got the, it's like a whole other level that we never would have predicted when we started our webcasts last month.
All right, let's start delivering our promise of more than just COVID. Okay, a very, very interesting story that emerged last week, a sad story, where 6 employees of a company where they were using liquid nitrogen died because of the escape of liquid nitrogen from a large holding tank of liquid nitrogen. And so, the question comes up, I mean, how can this be? The nitrogen certainly is not toxic. It's 80% of the air that we breathe. No issue with this. So what happened? Well, what happened is that liquid nitrogen, of course, will evaporate very, very quickly. So this tank somehow got opened. It's not clear just what happened. And of course, the liquid immediately begins to boil off and becomes nitrogen vapor, which is still very cold, and it will sink to the ground and displace air. So these unfortunate people suffocated because of the lack of oxygen. It's not that the nitrogen was toxic. It was the fact that they didn't get any oxygen. It's really a terrible story, and it's one that actually hits kind of home to any kind of a university chemistry environment, because we have a lot of liquid nitrogen sitting in the basement here. And so, Adam, do you ever use liquid nitrogen?
Not for my own experiments, but we use it a lot doing outreach activities, because we can make astronaut ice cream with liquid nitrogen and do a few different experiments. And it's one of the reasons why the official rules when we go down, so we usually do our demos on the 1st or 2nd floor, and the liquid nitrogen is in the basement. So when we go down and fill up our dewars to carry the liquid nitrogen, we have to then put it in the elevator, hit the button, and run up the stairs ourselves. We're not allowed to take the elevator with the liquid nitrogen, because if it was leaking, it could very quickly displace all the oxygen and suffocate us.
Right. And it has happened. It has happened in chemistry departments. There are 2 cases that I've been able to dig up, one in Poland and one, I think, in Korea, where graduate students in chemistry were, I think, carrying dewars of liquid nitrogen, and somehow it spilled, and they were in an environment where there was not much air circulation. And the description of one of these events is pretty frightening, where they found the body frozen to the floor, and they literally had to pry the body off of the floor. Yeah.
I used to manage a biobank at a hospital, and so these were tissue samples that were, again, kept in the vapor phase of liquid nitrogen. And so we had this little closet where our cryogenic freezer was there next to the liquid nitrogen tank that would feed it. And we had to have an oxygen monitor just outside the room that would monitor the oxygen levels inside the room. And we were told, whenever you're inside that room, you keep the door open, because if something happens, you don't want to find yourself in this tiny little closet with the door, either shut or completely locked, because you might die. Like, yeah, this is serious.
Yeah, you might. And in fact, there's a very interesting story. This one here. Suicide, believe it or not, with liquid nitrogen.
Wow.
That actually makes a lot of sense to me, because it's a lot like carbon dioxide.
Yes, exactly.
Why it's so dangerous, why you need a carbon dioxide monitor when you're sleeping, because it'll just slowly rise up to the level of your bed.
And you remember the story of carbon dioxide, Lake Nyos in Africa. There was a huge eruption, and an underground volcano erupted, sending a huge bubble of carbon dioxide gas to the surface, which covered the surrounding area, and over 1,000 livestock died, and a large number of people, because the
Wow.
carbon dioxide pushed air, away, so they had no oxygen.
We should clarify, just Jonathan pointed it out once. We keep saying dioxide, we mean carbon monoxide. Carbon dioxide is in our environment all the time. It's not great, but it's...
No, carbon dioxide. It is carbon dioxide.
Ada's example that you meant to say was monoxide.
Carbon monoxide.
Monoxide. Those are the monitors we have in our house. I think Joe's story was carbon dioxide.
It is. The story is carbon dioxide. The volcanic eruption is carbon dioxide, which is heavier than air. So it's exactly the same story as with nitrogen. It pushes the air out of the way, so you basically suffocate. But anyway, getting back to the gentleman who committed suicide. He had a divorce. Also, there were allegations of some sexual misconduct. He was going to be arrested. And he committed suicide with an apparatus that he made at home from a milk carton, one of those plastic cartons in which you put containers of milk.
I'm not sure we should be describing this. I'm not sure we should be making the promotion of how to do this.
Well, but they won't be able to get the nitrogen, so I think we're okay. So, and he took a polyethylene sheet that he put on over this. He put his head inside. He got himself a cylinder of liquid nitrogen, opened it, and the end result was that he suffocated himself.
So the lesson is gases are bad. Gases, don't breathe them in. They're just terrible.
Yes, except if it's exactly the right mix of oxygen, nitrogen, argon, and few other smatterings of the gases. No, but the moral of this story is that people just assume that nitrogen, because it makes up 80% of the air, doesn't present any kind of a problem, but it can. And, it's the old story that chemicals are not good or bad. It depends on how you use them. And you can use them either to your advantage or you can use them in a disadvantageous way. So that's with nitrogen. Ada, maybe you want to get back just for a second to the liquid nitrogen ice cream. I think that's an interesting story that people may be interested in. Yeah. How do you make liquid nitrogen ice cream?
You're muted, Ada.
I'm mute.
Not my day. So essentially we take, because the basic ingredients of ice cream are just cream, sugar, flavor, and something to cool it all down. So we take just basic coffee creamer and we put it in little bowls and slowly pour liquid nitrogen over top of it. Because it sits at about negative 200 degrees, it'll really quickly freeze the cream. So we get our volunteers, not during COVID, of course, but before COVID, we get them to stir really quickly the cream, and just before their eyes, it freezes solid. It's pretty magical. Honestly, it's one of the most exciting things we do, and not just because we get to eat the leftovers.
Right. Science is the best kind of magic.
Yes.
All right. The term snake oil, used very often these days to describe any kind of questionable therapy. And it has a long and interesting history, actually emerging out of the so-called patent medicines in the UK and in Britain. Perhaps, people have heard or seen examples of medicines that come from England saying something like, by patent to the Queen, or patent to the king, or supplier to the queen or king. And these days you have all kinds of stuff. You have shampoos and soaps that are made by so-called royal patent. And back in the early 1800s, this was a real thing in the UK, that manufacturers would get a license to produce something for the royal family. This was said to be a patent. And some of the settlers from the UK brought this idea across to North America. And obviously here people jumped on this idea, started selling all kinds of patent medicines, even though, of course, here it had no meaning. They weren't really patented. And they were cure-alls. And the most famous one of these was Clark Stanley's snake oil liniment. And the snake oil has a very interesting history as a potential treatment. And it was introduced into North America by Chinese workers who came in the 1800s to build the Continental Railway. And of course, that was quite trying on the muscles. And they brought across with them this remedy from China where they would rub the oil extracted from Chinese water snakes on their painful joints. And supposedly it had some benefit. Maybe, because it contains omega-3 fats, and omega-3 fats may have some anti-arthritic effect. Certainly, if you take them, rubbing it is questionable. Anyway, Clark Stanley thought that this was really neat, but of course, he didn't have any Chinese snakes, so he substituted rattlesnakes. And taking a page out of other charlatans like P.T. Barnum, who used to do public demonstrations, all kinds of unusual things, he would take rattlesnakes, kill them in front of the audience, immerse them in hot water, and when the oil would rise to the top, he would say that this is the oil that he was selling. Although the actual bottles that he sold never really contained any snake oil, because he wasn't killing enough snakes in order to do this. And people would rub it on their joints and would feel better. Most probably the placebo effect, because rattlesnakes actually don't have very much omega-3 fat. Although Clark Stanley also put some capsicum powder in there, that's hot pepper powder, and that may have some pain-killing effects. And he was taken to court in 1907 because a law had been introduced in 1906 under President Teddy Roosevelt, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which said that you can't label things sort of in a fraudulent way. And they got after Clark Stanley, not because his remedy didn't really work, but because it didn't really contain snake oil. And he had to eventually pay a fine, which was about $20. And obviously that would be, I don't know, equivalent probably of a couple $100 today. But he paid the fine, and then he went on selling the snake oil. And because it really didn't do anything, today we use the expression snake oil to describe remedies that don't really work. And believe it or not, snake oil is still around today. I found it on Amazon. Here it is. And when you look at the list of ingredients, it actually lists snake oil. It doesn't say what kind of snake oil it is. And what it is supposed to do is prevent hair growth. So it's kind of targeted at women who don't like the idea of depilatories, don't like the idea of shaving, and they're supposed to use snake oil in order to prevent
Is it because snakes don't have hair?
Right. There is no justification for it, but I guess that would be it. Snakes don't have hair. But notice also the picture here depicts a cobra.
Oh.
So somehow I don't think that it's cobra extract that is in this product. I don't think cobras quite willingly give up their oil. So ladies, Emily and Ada, ready to try snake oil as a depilatory?
No.
I'll do it if you pay me.
Yeah, because it's not going to do anything. That's why. But
It's not very vegan either.
What?
No, not very vegan either.
Is that product actually called snake oil? What's it called?
Yes, it is. It actually says snake oil on here. It says snake oil stop hair. Yes.
I mean, it's almost like it's like a blatant, we don't do anything, versus at least that one's in your face. There's all the others that are covert and,
right. I mean, of course, there are all kinds of snake oil, what we would now call snake oil. Others would call them dietary supplements. Right, which promise all kinds of miracles, of course, without any kind of evidence.
Right.
Well,
amazing that Clark could not sell his product because it didn't contain any actual snake oil, and yet they can sell homeopathic remedies that do not contain even a single molecule of what they claim to be made of.
Right.
Right. Well, homeopathy, of course, we'll have to once devote a whole discussion to that, because it's one of the most absurd pseudoscientific concept that is out there. But let's finish off here with a real bit of science where there actually is some evidence. There was a study that came out recently about fried foods. And it's somewhat of a disturbing study because it suggests that fried foods are unhealthy. I mean, we all have the suspicion, of course, even without looking into the science, that is the case, because fried foods generally taste good. And there's this kind of, rule of thumb in nutrition that if it tastes good, it probably isn't good for you.
But this study is not the first that says fried foods is
No,
bad.
not
No.
at all.
No.
But you can eat all the kale, all the seaweed that you want, right? This is okay. Now, what fried foods? No, of course we've had a history of venomous attacks on fried foods, justifiably, because they're usually fried in fat that has a good dollop of saturated fat in it, and we know what that does. That's the enemy of coronary arteries because it forms deposits. Plus, of course, when you heat up fat to high temperature, it breaks down and forms all kinds of nasty compounds, which many of them are carcinogens. Acrylamide is one of those. It forms and breakdown product from fats. And certainly, there's also the possibility of trans fat formation when you heat some unsaturated fats to high temperature. But no, this just underlines that. And, the more often we get this kind of information out there, the more likely people are to remember it and start taking a closer look at what it is that they are eating. Now, in this case, the analysis, what we call a meta-analysis. Maybe, Jonathan, you can pipe in here and just describe what a meta-analysis is.
So meta-analysis is a study of studies. So you are taking usually all or most of the studies that were done to answer a particular question, and you're putting them through a statistical machine to see what is the best answer that we have to our question based on all of these studies. And you weigh also how good the study was to get to that final result.
So, of course, over the years, we've had thousands and thousands of studies on nutrition. And many of these have looked at the relationship between fat in the diet and disease. One of the problems with these studies is that they usually are based on self-reporting. People fill out questionnaires about what they ate, how much of it they ate, when they ate it, etc. These are notoriously unreliable because most of us can't remember what we had for breakfast, and especially if you have to describe how many grams of a certain food you ate, and people are, of course, are puzzled. But hopefully, when you have lots of studies and you put it all together, this kind of averages out. So when they put all these studies together, what they discovered was that there was a link between various kinds of diseases and eating more fried foods. That's what it comes down to. But there's nothing new here. I mean, we all suspect that eating a lot of fried foods is not good. So we're all trying to cut down on that. And this is one of the reasons that plant-based diets seem to be more beneficial, because you don't tend to fry these. But there are also some shortcuts here. And Emily, you were saying that you got an
air fryer.
An air fryer.
Which really doesn't.
And I asked, how is this different from an oven?
Right, and exactly. So the air fryer, though, also does not fry foods. It's one of those. It's like a trick for the mind that you could coat stuff. You could use the breadcrumbs, the cornstarch. Like when I look at the recipes, you're still coating it in stuff. You're just not deep frying it in oil. I mean, that's really what it is. So it's like a bucket, and some of the buckets are super small, which for portion control, if you also want to do it, lose weight that way. But ours is a little bigger, and you could a little bit of oil it calls for, and then you could put whatever you want on it. If you want to fry it, you could put the breadcrumbs, whatever, and you put it in this canister oven thing that sits on my counter, and it depends on the food, and it goes up until like 500 degrees. So it's like a blast of high heat for a short amount of time. But as Jonathan pointed out before, to me, it's pretty much the same as what an oven can do, which he's right. However, it takes less time, there's less mess, and it also, you just think like, oh, I air fried a whole chicken today, and it tastes yummy, So, but to be honest, like when we started doing—
Did it taste yummy?
Yeah, it did. And we did chicken wings, and we're thinking about, things to do for Super Bowl, like onion rings or, chicken wings like that. The onion rings are good because you can't do that so easily in the oven. I don't think, not as great. When it comes to vegetables and potatoes, we were doing those in the oven anyway. But
well, certainly it's better than deep frying. There's
better than deep frying.
No question
you
about
could probably start doing also like a junk food. You know how they like deep fry a Snickers bar and all those stuff? I wonder how that would taste. I don't know. We did not venture into that territory.
Well, I will admit to once having had a deep fried Oreo.
Where'd you have that?
Where else? In Texas.
Oh.
And this was it was very interesting. It was in a restaurant where I went in for breakfast, and
You had a deep fried Oreo for breakfast?
No.
Texas.
Let me first tell you the beginning of the story. So I go into this restaurant, and I asked for oatmeal for breakfast.
Oh,
This is serious stuff. And the waitress looks at me and she says, "Sir, this is Texas. If we can't fry it, we don't serve it." So that's how this whole
Good
thing started.
answer.
So I said, "Well, what do you serve that's fried?" It says, "Well, we don't have any oatmeal, but we do have deep fried Oreos." So I said, "All right, well, I got to give that a shot."
How are they even comparing oatmeal to deep fried Oreos? How did it taste?
It tasted about as bad as a non-fried Oreo.
Really?
I'm not an Oreo.
Oh, I love Oreos.
Yeah, I like Oreos.
But,
Well, Joe,
it
you
was
know,
worth it so I could tell the story.
In Vegas, there's that what's it called? The heartbreak.
The heart attack grill.
The heart attack grill.
Yes.
We probably have also, deep fried Mars bars and stuff like that.
Well, they have, of course, they used to have the classic triple bypass burger, but now they have bypassed that. Now they have the quadruple bypass burger, 9,980 calories.
Oh.
And there is an ambulance standing by outside. And when you go
Just sign a waiver.
instead of napkins, you get hospital gowns. And the waitresses are dressed like nurses. So it's kind of an interesting, unusual experience. And
it's very Vegas.
If you're over 350 pounds, you eat for free. That's the American way.
Yeah,
that's the American way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's just to finish off here. We get mail on mail on mail. We get mail bags that are full of mail. So let's take one or two, Emily, that came in.
Well, someone asked about, because we also promoted that we were going to talk about calories. So someone was talking about, what is a calorie? Are some calories better than others? And serving sizes, on the back of packages and everything, which it's a good segue from our fried food component.
It is.
Are some calories better than others? I mean,
the calorie question is a very interesting question, because the way that calories originally were determined was by taking a food and putting it into something we call a bomb calorimeter, and essentially burning it and seeing how much heat it produced, because calories are just a unit of energy. It's a measure of heat. And using that technology, eventually it was determined that a gram of fat will provide 9 calories, carbohydrates and proteins 4 calories per gram. And now, when you see that on labels, generally the way that those numbers are arrived at are just by multiplying the grams of protein by 4, the grams of carb by 4, and the grams of fat by 9. That's how they get the total calories, which is actually quite misleading, because the human body is not a bomb calorimeter. We don't literally
maybe yours isn't.
Pardon?
Maybe yours isn't.
Well, yeah. I mean, we do eventually burn it. It is a good analogy. I mean, that's what we do. We derive energy from the food that we eat. But it is not exactly correct to say that every kind of calorie derived from carbohydrate or from protein is the same, because it doesn't take into account the percentage that these nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream. Some of them pass out through the feces. So there are significant errors in the calorie count, because, like I said, it just assumes that every gram of the carbohydrate that goes into your mouth eventually translates into carbon dioxide and water that we exhale and produce energy, and that just isn't the case. So it's really just an approximation. And but
we do know that the more calories in and less calories out.
Yes, I mean this is some, we will never ever transcend the laws of thermodynamics. So there's no question that the only way to lose weight is to spend more calories than you take in. Except that there are a lot of complications in that equation that we'll discuss at some other time. But the basic thermodynamics holds true. You've got to spend more than what you take in, right? And A lot of people are accustomed to that when it comes to their bank account, but this is a different kind of a story. All right. Well, that's it. We've done some COVID. We have dealt with some other interesting things. And that's the nice thing about science, is that there's always new information coming out. There's always some historical stuff that we can look at. There always are some snake oil remedies out there that need to be unmasked. And we will do that again next week or in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Thursdays, we release these at noon on Thursday, but of course, these programs will be available from then on. So thanks a lot for watching. And remember, a dose of science every 2 weeks.
Bye.